I'm obsessed with getting to the root of the problem. I want the most efficient way to fix things. And what I started to realize is that many of the problems that my clients came to me for, whether it's for coaching or on the podcast, things like perfectionism and people pleasing and their negative self-talk, that a lot of that is rooted in the culture that we were raised in.
Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and on the podcast today, I'm joined by Andrea Owen. Andrea is an author, global speaker, and professional certified life coach who helps high-achieving women maximize unshakable confidence and master resilience. She's coming out with a brand new book next week on August 31st. It's called Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind, and Own Your Strength. And in today's episode, we really dive in to Andrea's new book. We talk about what it means to take up space and why we often fear shining too bright. Andrea walks us through the 4 steps to unlearning what we've been taught, and I really enjoyed this part of the episode. We then dive into why women's empowerment is actually an act of rebellion, modeling a new perspective and model really on leadership, and why speaking our truth can often be intimidating. Andrea shares with us her obsession with Cha Cha DeGregorio from the movie Grease and her advice when it comes to cultivating more confidence. We also dive into why it's important to take what we need and leave the rest, especially when it comes to professional development and self-help, her biggest dream, the biggest risk Andrea's ever taken, and just so much more. One of the reasons why I do this podcast is because I really want you to be able to live a happier, more joyful, and just ease-filled life. And so that's why I'm so happy to share that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. The last year and a half, there is no doubt it's been difficult. And that's why I think now more than ever, it's important that we have reliable resources that we can turn to. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. So this is how it works. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. It's easy and free to change counselors if you don't think the person you're matched with is a good fit. And this service is available for people worldwide too. BetterHelp also offers a broad range of expertise in their counselor network, so you'll get timely and thoughtful responses, and you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions too. So, as a listener of Seek the Joy podcast, you will get 10% off your first month by going to BetterHelp.com/seekthejoy. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/seekthejoy. The link will also be included in our show notes. Andrea has taught hundreds of thousands of women tools and strategies to really empower themselves to live their most kick-ass life through her speaking, her books, coaching, and her widely popular podcast called Make Some Noise. And so it was just a lot of fun to sit down with her for today's new episode. As always, I cannot wait to hear what you think about this one. What are your biggest takeaways, your insights? What resonated with you? Make sure to join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. And no matter where you're tuning in right now, make sure to hit that follow button so you never miss a new episode. All right, that's it. That's all I've got for you for today's intro. Cannot believe we're really at the end of August, the end of summer here. I'm not ready to say goodbye. I'm not ready to say goodbye to summer 2021, but I am ready to dive in to this new episode with Andrea. So Andrea, thank you for such a fun conversation all about making noise, taking up space, and the 4 steps to unlearning. So here it is with Andrea Owen. So Andrea, thank you for coming on Seek the Joy podcast. I have been loving reading your new book, Make Some Noise. And by the time this episode airs, it will be out into the world and ready for everybody to read it. So it's called Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind, and Own Your Strength. What made you decide to write the book? And also why now? Because I think the timing is so interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm super excited to be here and have this conversation with you. And I wrote the book because honestly, if I'm going to be totally transparent, I was kind of pissed. I was
Yeah.
at a point where I had been doing this work in women's empowerment for a long time. I had written 2 previous books, and this is also coming off the heels of the what was happening socially after the 2016 election. And then in 2017, when the Me Too movement happened, and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things that are happening socially and culturally, and feeling all of that, you know, all the feelings that were involved with lots of people, lots of women. And I also kind of was looking around at our culture. I'm obsessed with getting to the root of the problem. I want the most efficient way to fix things. And what I started to realize is that many of the problems that my clients came to me for, whether it's for coaching or on the podcast, things like perfectionism and people pleasing and their negative self-talk, that a lot of that is rooted in the culture that we were raised in. So, for instance, for women, we are raised to be nice, be accommodating, to
Mm-hmm.
take care of others, to put other people's comfort before our own at all times, that's what's considered a good woman. I'm using air quotes over here for people who can't see us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I got tired of yelling girl power, you can do it, you just have to work really hard and want it hard enough and do these steps in this process, when really it was the culture that was largely holding us back. And this isn't to blame any one person, or even like men. It's not, it's again, it's this culture that raised
Yeah.
us that I
Yeah.
wanted to point at.
Yeah, I think it's more cultural than anything. And I think it's so interesting what you said. It came from a place of just being tired, pissed with the
Mm-hmm.
status quo of how things were going. Because you're right. I think we are taught from a very young age, don't make noise, be
Right.
quiet,
Don't make
take
a
up
scene.
as little space as possible. And then as we get older and we're either in the corporate world or we're running our own businesses, or you're in the world of business, you're making a living, whatever profession you choose, there comes a time where you have to speak up for yourself. You have to assert yourself. You have to, or you choose to make a little bit more noise, and then we feel uncomfortable. Like I'm sure you've had these
Sure.
moments where you speak up for yourself in a situation where maybe they didn't expect a woman to, and then you feel like, oh, should I have just done that? So
Right.
it's like embedded culturally, but then at the same time we are working to push ourselves, to speak up for ourselves and to assert ourselves and, um, you know, put ourselves in positions of power. And it just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel natural at that point for so many of us.
No, it doesn't. And I think, I love the power conversation. I think that
Mm.
actually might be my next book.
Yes.
But we've also been taught that there's only one way to do it. And, we follow men who do power a certain way. And a lot of women don't want to do it that way. But there's really no other models. And a lot of times, there was a study in 2016, there was a Pew study, and they looked at different attributes and words for people, and they had people rate them, is this good or bad for men versus women? And they were words like nurturing and beautiful and things like that. And the word power was scored very low for if a woman was viewed that way versus if it was a man. So this is in 2016. This wasn't
Wow.
even like in 1950, where you would think like,
Right.
of
Where you'd
course.
expect it.
This was recent, and it's still looked at for women. We are stereotyped. We are categorized as bitchy or difficult
Mm-hmm.
if we exert our power. And a lot of times we don't know how to do it. So we kind of maybe don't have hard conversations the best, and we don't know how to give constructive criticism and feedback and things like that. So it's a much bigger conversation.
I think so too. You know, what you just said reminds me so much of how I think as women, we try and fit the mold of what leadership looks like for a man, rather than having the ability or the privilege to define leadership from this perspective of a woman or anyone that identifies with being a woman or the feminine energy. And I think, God, I just hope, things continue to shift and move so that women can assert themselves and move into positions of leadership, but do so in a way that really fits their own mold that makes the most sense for them, that feels nurturing, that feels empathetic, that is coming from a space of compassion and being mindful. I know you talk in the book too about that women's empowerment is really an act of rebellion. This is really what this conversation feels like. That it feels like rebellion, going against the mold, going against what we've been taught and been shown our whole lives.
It is. And I hadn't thought about that before until I started thinking about this book and having conversations with some of my friends and colleagues around this topic. And I remember having a conversation with my friend Kate, and that statement came out, women's empowerment is an act of rebellion because we are pushing back on these ways of being that we are taught, again, that are good, that are kind of our place. And so when we push back on that, a lot of the work I do is around boundary setting. Women don't know how to have conversations with their partner, or ask for a raise at work, or ask for time off, or, talk to a friend that has been hurting their feelings and that friend had no idea they were doing it. I can't tell you, I just made a TikTok video about this today, literally like 2 hours ago, about how often I hear, but I don't like confrontation. And I'm like, literally no one does. Stop saying that. Stop using that as an excuse, because that's not what boundary setting is. It's just a hard conversation and you don't like it because there is a lot at stake and it's uncomfortable. Of course it's uncomfortable. No one if they like confrontation, they're an a-hole. Like, I don't want to meet you.
Yes. But it's just about having that hard conversation and speaking your truth. And speaking your truth sometimes feels like the most intimidating thing. It's terrifying because on the other end of it, I think we anticipate rejection. We anticipate someone not understanding us, or we also anticipate how it could go really positively and someone actually understands how we're feeling. And that can feel like a shock too. Like, it can go in both ways. Vulnerability. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I know you talk about too in the first 2 chapters of the book, it's this concept of shining too bright. And it feels like it really resonates so much with what we've been talking about so far about taking up space, and either our fear of, if we do, what will happen if we take up too much space, or just not knowing that it's something that we can do. So I think a good place to start with what I want to ask you is, what does it really mean to take up space, and how can we begin to do that for ourselves if it's something that doesn't feel innate or natural?
Yeah, that's a great question. And taking up space typically looks like, on a practical level, it's sharing your opinion, whether you're doing it on social media, or you're doing it at Thanksgiving with your family, or you're doing it to your partner. It is about taking up space with your body. I mean, no one can argue that we live in a fat phobic culture, and, hopefully we'll work to a place of fat acceptance. And it's also taking up space with your voice, just in general with your voice. And I also talk about in the book how even just walking down the street, women are more likely to get out of the way when a man is approaching versus the other way around. And it's about noticing these subtle things that we do. And what I ask the reader to do is question your objections around it. And that's really the theme of the book a lot. I know we can get into that too. It's just, I'm not expecting people to change their entire life overnight. Like, that is an impossibility. Like, I just turned 46 and I'm still unlearning all of these things that I've been taught and conditioned to think and to believe and to do. First and foremost, I just want you to get curious. Like, get curious about why you are afraid to take up space with your opinions or your body or your voice. Why are you afraid to outshine others? Does it make you uncomfortable to, tell your friends when you're out at happy hour that you just got a promotion, and, tell people how much money you're making because it's the most money you've ever made? And I'm not asking you to not be uncomfortable by it right away. I'm just asking you, like, why do you think that is? Like, have a conversation with your friends about that, about why you're uncomfortable in the first place.
Yeah. And chances are, if you feel this way, your friends feel this way as well.
100%.
And I think it's interesting too, because the more that I think about this topic of taking up space and any kind of fear or apprehension around it, I really feel like it comes down to this fear of shining too bright, which is what those chapters are about. And I'm curious, in your experience or through your work, why do we fear shining too bright? Like, where does this come from? Like, does it come from cultural norms? Like, I just think it's so because I don't know if men feel this way. Like if there's a man listening to this, please DM me and like, let me know, like, do you fear shining too bright? Because I know so many women, me included, who have this fear at times.
Right. And, to be more specific about it, that part of the book was spawned from a coaching session that I had with a longtime client of mine who was afraid to talk about her successes with her family because her sister was having a really difficult time.
Yeah.
And it's the fear of outshining others. What's his name? The guy that wrote The Big Leap, Gay Hendricks. Is that his last name? I forget. The book is right behind me. But he wrote
that sounds right.
A book called The Big Leap, and he talks about these four main kind of like core beliefs that people have that prevent us from having more success. And one of them is that. And it's an interesting section because the example that he gives is kind of like a straw man type of example, which is fine. But I think for women, it looks a little bit different. And, he talks about how this could come from our childhood based on like where we were with our siblings and things like that. But for women, to answer your question, Sydney, it's about, again, how we were raised, and do not act like you're too big for your britches. I don't know if it was like this when you were in middle school, but when I was in middle school, like one of the worst things you could be called was conceited, to like care a little bit too much about your appearance because you don't, and, and sometimes the prettiest girls were the ones that were bullied. And it's, we are definitely taught to stay in our lane and to know our place.
Yeah.
And it's very mixed messages too, and I want to stop for a moment and say, like, men also have their cultural crap, like that was put onto them, which has made it extremely difficult for them to grow and evolve and, be emotionally intelligent, et cetera. And there are some great books out there for that. But I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not just women that struggle, but, like we are definitely taught what we should be like. And it's these mixed messages of be attractive enough to, attract a mate, the male gaze, but not too much to where we're going to think that you care too much about how you look or that you're too sexy, or we make assumptions about who you are sexually, et cetera, et cetera.
So much of this is about unlearning, right? It's like unlearning what we've been taught, unlearning the messages we received. So many, you mentioned bullying. So many people have experienced this. I had an interesting conversation earlier this year with Molly Galbraith. She's the co-founder of, she wrote the new book, Strong Women Lift Each Other Up, Girls Gone Strong. And she was talking about how a lot of her feelings about who she was as a woman and how she needed to be in the world came from bullying from other women. And so it's like we as a collective, we receive these messages, but then often it's from other women too, who are telling you to stay in your lane. 100%. Telling you not to shine too bright, telling you, and it comes from their own, it's like this domino effect of fear, insecurity, cultural norms, ways of being in the world. And so we have to unlearn all of this. And I know at the end of every chapter, you outline 4 steps for readers to do this unlearning. So I would love to talk about this because the whole book is valuable, but if I could like point people to one aspect of this book, I think it's these steps about unlearning because it's so doable. So
that's what I wanted. Thank you for saying that. I wanted it to be doable for the reader.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back quickly to one thing that you said, and I haven't read that book. It sounds great, but if I'm assuming that she talked about internalized misogyny in that book. And if she hasn't, and if people don't know about it, I encourage you to Google it and do some research because I write about it briefly in, I think, chapter 9.
Yeah.
And, that's, girls bullying other girls and slut shaming and these things that we do. Women aren't inherently mean to each other. I see that in comment sections and like, oh, women are just backstabbing, especially to each other. And I'm like, no, we're not. We're not inherently like that.
I think it's learned.
It is learned behavior. There is some research that shows that some of it actually is nature. So I don't want to say we're not at all. And it comes just from like the biological standpoint of survival.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it is absolutely learned. It's internalized misogyny.
Yeah.
Okay. So to answer your question, the 4 steps of unlearning, I wanted to make it very clear again, repeating what I said a few minutes ago, that this isn't about just turning your life upside down and changing the way you think and everything that you do. This is a lifelong process. And so the first step is to notice. Just notice when you are judging another woman for her promotion or her financial goals. Even if she says she wants to make, multiple six figures this year, are you secretly judging her? If you are, what else? There's so many things to notice.
So many.
If you're afraid to shine too bright, if you're afraid to take up space, etc. So notice when you're doing it. And then the second step, which is so important, coming off the heels of noticing, and that's getting curious. Because a lot of times when we notice, we get up in our feelings about it and we might beat ourselves up for it. I know, when I looked at my own internalized misogyny, I was like, holy crap, I am a terrible human being. And the truth is no, I'm not. I'm a product of a culture that made me this way, and I'm human. And luckily, I have the capacity to learn a different way of thinking and behaving. So it's just get curious. And I ask over 250 questions in the book where that's what I'm asking people to do. It's just hold no charge around it. Like it's not good or bad. It just is. Get curious about it. And the third step is self-compassion, which is sort of obvious based on what I just said. Be kind to yourself. This is really big work. And then the last step is to keep the momentum. So that is things like having conversations with your friends about it, not necessarily from the place of an expert, just to say like, hey, I was reading this book and there was this chapter around, X, Y, and Z. Just here's what I learned. What do you think about that?
Thank you for sharing the 4 steps. And I hope people wrote this all down, or you can just, go back a little bit and write down what Andrea just shared again, because I think, you talk about this in the book too, but we can't really implement anything new until we really understand the root of why we feel or think that way. And I love at the beginning of our conversation, you're like, I am just all for understanding the root of why things are the way they are. And I think
Let's get it done.
Let's get it done. And I think this is so interesting because so many of us, we want to implement new routines, rituals, ways of thinking, positive self-talk. And then when we do so, affirmations. And then when we do so, it doesn't feel right because we haven't done that work of peeling back the layers, diving into that level of self-awareness, which to me, that's really what noticing feels like. It's like diving in and becoming more self-aware. And then once you, get curious about it, which I know is step 2, and then you start to, not judge yourself. This feels like the hardest part for me is like removing that element of judgment and stepping into greater self-compassion, because we are our harshest critics like all the time. Like, I think that's really where for most of my life, this negative self-talk came in, because you expect to be somewhere else. You expect to feel something else. You see what other people are doing. And then, you compare yourself. So just having that element of self-compassion, hardest step, but probably the most rewarding, which then gets you to this place of taking action. And so when you talk about, for people, taking action and keeping this momentum, where do you point them in terms of, this unlearning? Are there tools, journaling prompts, anything you recommend? Of course, it's going to probably depend on what we are unlearning, but is there anything that you use that's been a go-to for you?
Oh, there are so many things. I'm a huge fan and advocate for therapy. I considered becoming one, but I didn't think I was, I don't know. I didn't think it was for me. And that's why I became a life coach and speaker and author. But I have had a therapist on and off since I was 17 and even hired a new one in 2020 to go through some trauma therapy. And I think that the work is never done. And I understand that it is a privilege to be able to pay for therapy, especially because how healthcare is in the United States. But if you can find a counselor or a therapist, I know that there's online options now, which are fantastic. So I think therapy can be helpful, especially when you uncover something. I know that if people are listening to your podcast, they value personal development. So they might read something in a personal development book or hear something on a show that they think to themselves like, oh, wow, that's me. And maybe it's time to take your happy ass back to therapy. Like, it's never done. I mean, I'm 46 and have been doing this work for what feels like forever. And I do this for a living, and I still get hung up on old trauma, old family of origin stuff. And I don't make myself wrong for it. So anyway, that's my soapbox about therapy.
Mm.
I always feel that journaling is helpful. And please believe me when I say I'm not the biggest fan of it and I write for a living, but journaling does not have to be pages and pages of writing.
No.
It can be a sentence. It can be a post-it note. Like that's what you get done. It's just something. I also think that just being still, even if it is outside in nature or, some people do yoga and meditation, can vastly help our mental health. So also a big fan of that. Nothing new and shocking, like the same tools that everyone else, they work.
Yeah, but just opportunities to process, to process what you're thinking, what you're feeling. I love what you shared earlier too about having these conversations with your friends, with people in your life that you really value. Often we don't have these kinds of conversations. Like I'm sitting here reflecting on my various friend groups, and sometimes we go deep. Like sometimes we talk about these things, and then other times we don't. And I think normalizing conversations around, taking up space, on sharing your voice, on making noise in the world, and why we feel we can or we can't. I mean, God, so valuable. So all my friends that are listening, I'm going to be talking to you about this very soon.
Buckle up.
Buckle up. It's
Well, this is one of the first questions I actually ask if I'm working with someone privately one-on-one. In one of our first sessions, I ask her to tell me, like, who are the key people in your life? Who are the people that you can trust and that also trust you? And if they don't have them, that's one of the things that we work on. A lot of times it's someone that has potential that they can nurture the friendship, and we go from there. And I also want to acknowledge that sometimes it's really hard when you are somewhere, maybe you're young and you are just out of college, and your friends from high school and college just really aren't into having deeper, more meaningful conversations. I mean, that doesn't make them wrong or bad. It's just about you being intentional and proactive in finding friend. And I talk about that in the book, and I list, like, here's all the ways to, like, make friends, because no one tells us how hard it is to make friends as adults.
Nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. And I actually found this incredible woman. She's a friendship coach, and I didn't even know that.
Is it Shasta Nelson?
No, it's Danielle Bayard Jackson. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Okay, I think I know who that one is
and
too.
I was like, so speaking of TikTok, you brought this up earlier. I was so blown away by her TikToks because, I never really thought about this. Like, yes, of course, it's more difficult to make friends, especially when you're out of a school setting and, you make friends at work. But then what if you are, self-employed, and how do you make friends? And it's just so fascinating. It's something that, I think we all experience. And then the difficulties that come up with friendships and how do you navigate it? No one really taught us those things, and we kind of learn from our peers. And I remember, in middle school, watching how other people handled difficulties with friends and falling out. And I thought, that can't be the best way we handle this, but I didn't know, a different way. So interesting what you brought up about friends. I'm so glad you include that in the book. We need more guidance around this for sure.
Well, people are lonely. Like, we're more connected than ever with social media, but I think we're also extraordinarily lonely.
Yeah.
And I was a terrible friend in my 20s. I was very fun. I will say that. Like, all of my friends that they will say Andrea was the fun one, but I was also confrontational, and I didn't know how to set boundaries, and it was just terrible. And I've actually circled back with some of them that I've kept in touch with, and we've had really candid conversations about it. And we both have admitted, like, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have maybe the greatest models with women friendships, but it wasn't until I was deep into my 30s where I learned what real, I don't love this term, but I'll use it, like big girl friendships actually are. And it's hard and loving conversations.
I love that you said loving, because whether it's about any kind of hard conversation, it's about approaching it from that loving space, approaching difficult situations at work. I think for me, coming from a loving, heart-centered space as much as possible, it has just paid dividends, like with even how I feel about those situations, let alone how someone else interprets it, but how I feel, approaching somebody coming from that space and knowing that you can, which goes back to the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about there really aren't enough models out there of women in leadership positions, in manager positions, in just situations of leading and being in the world in a way that is authentic to them, as opposed to a model set out by men. I almost just said male model, and then people would think I'm talking about models, and that is totally
I would
not
have
what
thought
I
you were
meant.
talking about models.
100%.
Well, you bring up a
100%.
good point. You bring up a good point, and I it's something I want to ask the listener to get curious about.
Yeah.
Not just the models in their life of maybe their mother or their sisters that they saw friendships, but look at the movies and TV shows that you watched, and what did the women friendships look like? And I'm thinking of I grew up watching the Golden Girls and still watch the Golden Girls because it's on Hulu and it's one of my favorites.
Wait, who was
I have
your
Golden Girls
favorite?
candles. Wait, I have Golden Girls coasters.
Those are fantastic.
Best present my husband ever got me.
Oh my God.
And I also have Golden Girls tarot cards that my best friend bought me for my birthday.
Oh my God.
I don't have a favorite because I love them all. But my point is they were pretty awful to each other.
Horrible.
Undermining and the crappy comments made for great comedy. But if that was real, the way they treat Rose, I'm just y'all, and the slut shaming of Blanche, okay. And then, so I guess Sex in the City is maybe the only TV show, but it's so revolved around. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I just, there weren't a whole lot, and how much are they going to show in a 22-minute episode that's heavily edited? They don't talk about, what happens when your friend inadvertently hurts your feelings and and it's weighing on you for days and days. And usually we're like, I'll just let it go. It's not that big of a deal. She didn't mean it. When really, broke our heart a little bit. These are the conversations that we need to have that are excruciating and that I've had with my best friend. And I never like to be told that I hurt her feelings. But I do. And we are closer because we can have those conversations. And yes, they are tearful. Yes, they make me feel like I'm going to have diarrhea. But this is what we need to do in order to have healthy relationships with each other.
The show Insecure on HBO, I think they do I
have not seen that yet. I need to watch it.
I think you would love it. I think they do such a good job of showing the intricacies of friendships and relationships. And so anyone that's listening, definitely check it out. I think that show came to mind right away when you were talking about friendships. And another show that it's more modern. It's called The Bold Type on Freeform. It's so directed towards younger generation, but I love it because it reminds me of Sex in the City. And I think they do a pretty good job too of showing, when someone's feelings are hurt or they really, a friend has offended you and navigating those difficult conversations. But growing up, I mean, I'm the Nickelodeon era of Rugrats and then,
okay.
Arnold and all. Yeah. I'm a 90s kid. We didn't, or Lizzie McGuire. We didn't, kind of in Lizzie, but we didn't really have that. And I know in the book you talk about Grease and Cha-Cha, the movie. Yes.
Love her.
What is can you talk a little bit about her? Because it ties so much, I know, to confidence. And so what is your obsession with Cha-Cha? So you got to talk about this. Because when I was young, of TV shows and entertainment,
I'm movies.
Speaking of movies, you got to go into this.
So, everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people have their favorite Grease character, and if you're a woman, it's probably Rizzo or Sandy. Or Frenchie. A lot of people like Frenchie, and that's fine. And mine has always been Cha Cha DeGregorio. And if you don't know who she is, I'm not surprised because she did not have very many scenes and she had even less lines. And so she was the one who, towards the beginning, is it Kaneki that introduces her? I can't remember.
I think it
is. Got his arm around her and he says, "Hey, Danny, I want you to meet Charlene DeGregorio." And she says, "My name is Chacha because they call me Chacha because I'm the best dancer at St. Bernadette's." Yes. Which a lot of people know what the next line is. It's Frenchie that says, "with the worst reputation." But I am so enamored that this woman just meets these people and she's telling them that she's the best dancer at her school.
The confidence oozing. Yes.
Can I have some? Right. And then she's also one of the most hated characters. If you go to clips on YouTube of her, they hate her.
She's villainized for sure.
She's so villainized.
Level of confidence that's almost villainized, I think. And the sex appeal too, for sure.
100%. And that and I'm not asking people to go out and act like Cha-Cha. Like she grabs Danny, she takes her date, she takes Sandy's date away.
Yeah.
And Cha-Cha did it because she wanted to win the dance contest. And she knew she needed a better partner than the one that she had. So they win the dance contest and she grabs the trophy out of the teacher's hand and waves it around. And it's just, if we look at her strictly from a place of symbolism, like she was written in to be over the top, self-assured and confident.
For sure.
And I remember as a child, just being enamored by that and just like, whoa, what is that? But then also seeing how much people hated her and understanding that you don't act like Cha-Cha. You act like Sandy. You change at the end of the movie into a sexy woman for a boy. Like that's what we do. And anyway, I grew up and my obsession with her continued.
It's so interesting when you talk about symbolism, because when I think of her, I don't think of confidence until I really read the book and understood what you were talking about. But I didn't think about her as confidence. I thought about her as the one that took Danny away from Sandy. And you're so right. Like the way Sandy is sort of as a symbol of purity in a lot of ways, and how as a woman you should be. And like you said, changing who you are to fit the mold of the man.
She even has a white dress on in that scene.
Yes, she does. Completely pure. Completely
She has this white dress on and she did not fight for him. She just throws her hands up in the air and leaves out of the gym and doesn't even say like, hey, you came here with me. And like Danny doesn't walk away from Cha-Cha either. We don't blame him.
No. All right. So then when it comes to confidence, I mean, what do you tell people? Like, do you have any advice or, pieces of wisdom to share if they're like, all right, I want to step into this level of confidence. Maybe it's like Cha-Cha, maybe it isn't, but just being more confident in your own skin. What do you share with people?
It is one of those things that I'm going to say something that people have probably heard before, and I'm glad because I think people need to keep hearing it. Yeah. Like we cannot wait to do things until we're ready. It is about, confidence is built by just having a tiny bit amount of courage and taking the leap, not knowing if the net will appear. The net might not appear. Like I can't promise you that it will. And we might fail and fall on our face. Like that's how we build resilience. So confidence is built by taking action before you're ready and kind of gaining it on the other side, if that makes sense. To put it very plainly, it's just realizing that you're not going to die from doing the thing. I'm sure it was nerve-wracking for you to start this podcast. And there are so many programs. So when I started a podcast, there were no like courses and stuff on how to do it. And now there are a million.
There was nothing. How long ago did you start your show, by the way?
2013.
Okay. I came in 2017. And even at that point, I didn't feel like there was a lot, but
not a lot.
Wow. You were way ahead of the curve.
I was way ahead.
Whoa.
And it really is just about like doing the thing before you are ready, even if you are terrified. And there's lots of other things I would love for people to have sort of prepared. Again, this goes back to friendship. Who are the people who's your support system? Like when you're about to do that scary thing, is it just people who are very safe and naysayers and like, oh, maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should be more ready. And are you sure you want to do that in this economy? And those types of things. Like, no, you want the people who are going to support you, how you want to be supported. And also, just another tool is to have your own Cha Cha DeGregorio. Like, is yours Beyonce or RBG or, Michelle Obama, like whoever, I talk about having an imaginary board of directors. These people, they don't have to be women. They can be someone of any gender who are this imaginary group of people that you can turn to and look at and have them encourage you, even if it's just in your mind, so that you can do the thing.
I love what you said about, just doing the thing before you're ready, like before you feel you are, and you may have a net that catches you and you may not. I always tell myself the right net will catch me. So whatever is supposed to come next is what's meant to happen. So I try not to put a lot of pressure on myself, because I think that's where we get hung up too, is like we are trying to manifest or visualize a very specific result. And that's why we keep waiting. We keep waiting because we're not confident that result will appear, that particular net, will appear. So I love what you said. And this idea of an imaginary board of directors. Oh, I just love it, because just imagine, who do you want on your team? Who do you want there supporting you, advising you? Who can you look to? Is it people in your life? Is it people that you admire? I just think that's such a beautiful and worthwhile exercise. It reminds me of something someone asked me to do when I just graduated from law school in 2016. And I was super unclear about like what I was going to do and what life was going to look like. And he said to me, think about who you would want to be at a dinner table with. Like pick 4 or 5 people. Who are they? What do they embody? What do they symbolize? Do they have traits that you aspire to have or grow into? And I remember sitting down and like doing this huge brainstorm, printing out people's pictures, putting it on a poster. Like I really went there.
I love that.
And I felt like I had an extra support system that I didn't have before. Now, those people are never going to know that they were on my poster board. Maybe one day they will. You never know. But for me at the time, it just served such a beautiful purpose of giving a little bit extra support that I totally needed. So thank you.
I love that you did that.
You unlocked a memory. I totally forgot I did that.
Memory unlocked.
Totally unlocked a memory. Because there's so many things that we do that you just totally forget about. So thank you. Yeah. That was a good memory for me to have.
I want to have some compassion for people. And this is by no means giving people an out, but there are some days, some days are harder than others. As someone who I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder in 2003, and it's like a roller coaster, like living with mental illness. It's like, you never know what you're going to get when you wake up. It's like a surprise. And some days I remember I've interviewed, people that I've really admired. And I had Janine Roth on my podcast, and I was so nervous to interview her. And it's not usually like me. Like I've been doing this long enough and I have enough experience where I don't feel intimidated by people, especially in my same field. But for some reason I felt intimidated. It was nothing she did. She was lovely and just so nervous. And then I felt stupid afterwards. And I was like, you know what? Today was an anxiety day and I can't plan for that. And I just chalked it up to, okay, wasn't my best day, wasn't my best interview, and probably no one noticed who was listening. No. But some days are better than others.
Self-compassion. It really comes back down to self-compassion. I love what you just said. Like some days are just anxiety days. Hell yeah. Some days are like days where like, I'm not brushing my hair today. This is the best you're going to get on Zoom to all my coworkers. Like I'm just doing my best, Oh,
there are days where I've had to like cancel all my meetings. Those are bad days. And those are few and far between, but they happen.
But knowing that it's going to happen and kind of mentally preparing and accepting it and being okay with it and having that level of compassion is huge. This reminds me so much of something you talk about. I think it's in the intro of the book about how you want the reader to take what they need, to take what resonates and leave the rest. Because often we walk away from personal development or self-help books, podcasts, conversations, feeling a little bit worse. Like,
totally.
I'm not you know what I mean? Like that feeling of, I'm not showing up in the way that this book is telling me I should, or I don't feel like I'm capable in this moment. And I just wanted to call that out because I love that you included that. And we need more of that as like a disclaimer. Take what resonates, leave the rest. Don't put any pressure or judgment on yourself. It's just an opportunity for you to explore and learn something. And I just am so glad you included that because, like I said, we need more of it.
Yeah. And toxic positivity is a thing, and
yes, it is.
I didn't want people I see a lot of people who read personal development books and walk away from them feeling inspired and motivated, and their life is exactly the same. And they think that they're broken or that they did something wrong. And then they feel worse than they did before they read the book. Exactly. After I wrote my first book, I had to really do some thinking about what I wanted my message to be. And like, I'll be honest, there's some toxic positivity in my first book. I wrote it in 2012. I wasn't evolved enough to totally get it other than the lens and my experience that I have. So I want people to, like I say in the book too, if you want to change your life, you have to change your life. But quite honestly, if you want to just listen to the audiobook and like have it playing when you work out because you like the sound of my voice, that's fantastic too. Like wherever you are is where you were meant to be. I truly believe that. I want to give people the dignity of their own process. And if that means you read 100 self-help books this year and don't make one change in your life, then that is your process. And that is okay. Absolutely.
I love this. I can't tell you how much I love this because I think, like you said, toxic positivity is a thing. It's a running problem. I make it a huge point in my life and what I share on the podcast to say, hey, we really need to acknowledge the tough stuff, the hard stuff, and be okay with it. But also know your joy. And I say your joy because it is personal and unique to you, and what inspires you and how you want to live your life can also, exist at the same time. And so it's knowing that you can hold on to your routines, your self-care, your compassion for yourself, your joy, and be where you are at in your process, because it's your process. It's not going to look like
That's why they call it personal development, because it's personal.
Amen. Amen. This reminds me of the beautiful poem you have at the start of your book called Burn It Down. What inspired this poem? And then if you're open to it, I would love for you to read it, because I think in a lot of ways, it like beautifully encapsulates the book. Make some noise.
Oh, thank you.
In a lot of ways. Yeah.
You know what? Poetry just lands in my lap. Like I don't want to make it sound that easy. It is definitely not that easy to write a book.
No, it is not. And you've written 3.
I've written 3 and I have ideas for 3 more.
Amazing.
Poems. I started writing poetry. My father passed away in 2016 and I wrote my way through it, and some poetry came out, and I haven't written poetry since my 20s. And poems tend to, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this a lot, how, they're like ideas that like kind of come like wind through. And if we don't sit down to make the art that has been, that is making its way through us, then it will find someone else. So I try as much as possible when I get ideas like this to either sit down at my laptop or pull out the notes app on my phone and just jot it down. So that's where it came from. And it came to me when I was in the middle of writing this book. So I thought, why not just, put it in? And my editor liked it. So yeah.
Well,
Ready?
I'm ready. Whenever you're ready. I can't wait for people to hear it.
I don't mean to like have such reverence in my voice, but
I think it's appropriate.
It's called Burn It Down. And actually it's called Burn It Down because I wanted that title for the book, but another woman, it's an anthology of essays. I haven't read that book, but I bet it's good. It's called Burn It Down. All right. She had fire in her belly and she used it to summon her truth. She had fire in her soul and she used it to remember where she came from. She had fire in her heart and she used it to trust the women who came before her. She had fire in her spirit and she used it to show other women their own flames. She had fire in her eyes and she used it to burn it all down. She had fire in her every being and she used it to blaze a new path, a new way, a new life.
It's so good. It's so good. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for reading it as part of our conversation. So I want to ask you a couple of questions to close. It's the questions I usually ask people who come on the podcast. I think the first one I want to ask you is, do you have a mantra or an affirmation, something that you hold on to that has either helped guide your journey or, reminds you to continue to make some noise, to make your noise in this world?
Yeah, it changes depending on what season of my life that I'm in. I had one about changing your path when I got sober in 2011. But lately I found this mug, and actually it's a local woman who, it's called Yay Brand. I'll show it to you since you can see me. And it says, I know exactly what I am supposed to do. I know it's kind of hard for you to see in the light, but
no, I can see it. It's
I saw it and I loved it because I consider myself a pretty decisive person. I don't know if it's because I'm an Aries or what, but like I don't agonize over decisions very often, but there are times where I feel stuck and I'm like, I don't know what I should do. And I don't know what's next. And I love shifting over into that mantra. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. And also telling myself the clues are all around me.
I know exactly what I am supposed to do. Because you know what? That goes back to trusting your own inner wisdom, trusting your process, knowing that, wherever I'm at is where I'm supposed to be. And I can keep learning and moving and doing, but this is where I'm supposed to be right now in this space. And there's comfort
you get
in
me
doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we speak the same language for sure. Okay, so you mentioned you're in Aries, and to me that makes so much sense. Do you know your rising and moon sign too?
Yes, I just looked it up and now I can't remember. Dang it. I can look up right now. I know I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, which pairs nicely as an Aries.
Yes, I think so too. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I also wanted to ask you, Because I think about so much about making noise is also we feel like it's a risk. Like to make the kind of noise in the world that we want to make feels risky. I'm sure there's so many risks that you've taken in your life, but is there one that stands out that has really like helped to guide you or, keep you going on this journey? Like a big risk that you've taken that has just felt like, God, like without it, I wouldn't be here.
God, there's been so many. I have a high tolerance for risk, which drives my husband a little bit crazy, but it's also great for entrepreneurship. I was going to
tell you that. I think it for sure is.
I think getting sober in 2011, I'm what's considered a high bottom. I didn't have, I didn't have to go to rehab. I wasn't chemically dependent on alcohol, but I knew it was not good for my future. I knew I was headed towards disaster if I kept drinking, and I didn't want to quit drinking. I liked it. I liked wine. I liked happy hour with my friends. I liked, mommy wine culture. I was into it. And I just knew I had to take the risk of sobriety. What I was not expecting was the gift of recovery, which is so much more than just not drinking. Like not drinking is a very, very minuscule part in recovery. It's all of the work that came with that. That's been the biggest personal development lesson of my life. And I'm incredibly grateful. I have almost 10 years.
Wow. That feels like a whole other podcast conversation we will have.
I'm happy to come back if you want to talk about it.
That is beautiful. All right. The last question I want to ask you is, this is really the one I ask everybody, but what is your biggest dream?
Oh my gosh. I have so many. The one off the top of my head is that my wish is for the future generation of women and girls, the girls, the gays, and the theys, maybe, that things change so that, and it's not just for women and girls, it's for everyone in the future, that we can come to some kind of unlearning and relearning of a new way of thinking and believing and showing up for each other. Like if we want to come home to each other, we have to take a really hard look at what's been created and have a reckoning. I mean, worldwide really, but and especially culturally, and, you and I are here in the States. It's a very big dream, liberation for all, but that's it. That's my dream.
I think it's coming slowly, but surely. Not as fast as I think we'd all like, but it's coming. Yeah. Andrea, I have loved this conversation. Thank you for coming on the Joy podcast. So where can everybody find you, connect, get your new book, make some noise, let them know when it's coming out, and learn more?
We made it super easy. AndreaOwen.com/noise is where they can grab it. It's on audiobook, ebook, all the things. Also in bookstores, August 31st. And there's free bonuses. So I made a really beautiful workbook. I didn't, my team did. I wrote the questions, but my team made it really beautiful and spell checked and all that good stuff. But that's also there, AndreaOwen.com/noise. And also come and say hi on TikTok or Instagram. I'm at Hey Andrea Owen on both of those platforms.
Perfect. Everything's going to go in the show notes. We'll make it so easy for everyone to find you, connect, learn more. And I think, if I could summarize my biggest takeaway from our conversation today, I think it's that you are here to make your own noise and shine your light. But to do so, you've really got to dig deep, get to the root of the why, the fear, the anxiety, the worry. And when you do, and you walk through this path of unlearning, the world is like your oyster, honestly. Like it's just there for you, and you can make it what you want and take what resonates and leave the rest. So Andrea, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really appreciate our conversation.
I appreciate you too. Thanks, everybody.
Seek the Joy podcast is a production of Seek the Joy Media and created, produced, and hosted by me, Sydney Weiss. You can tune into all of our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're enjoying the show, hit follow and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Make sure to join the community, join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. And don't forget, you can actually watch today's new episode and all of our episodes on our brand new YouTube channel. Click that link in the show notes to subscribe and tune in. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you right back here next week for another Seek the Joy Tuesday.